The morning Derek Harmon laughed at his ex-wife in a crowded lobby. He was 39 years old, newly featured in a regional business magazine, and standing with three men he needed to impress. She was 36. She was wearing a courier uniform, and she was holding a package addressed to the 14th floor of the very building where his company had its offices. He didn't even pause. "Amanda?" His voice carried across the marble floor with something between disbelief and amusement. "Is this seriously? You're a delivery driver now." She looked up from her scanner. She didn't answer. "Guys, this is my ex-wife." He turned to his associates with a half-smile that said everything about who he thought he was and who he thought she had become. She used to come to these buildings as a guest. Now she's, well. He gestured at her uniform. "Life takes interesting turns, doesn't it?" One of the men laughed. Another looked away. Amanda adjusted the strap of her bag, pressed the elevator button, and waited without a word. That silence, that particular, deliberate silence, was the most dangerous thing in the room. And Derek Harmon had no idea. Welcome to Morel Folktales. If you're new here, take a second right now, hit that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We have viewers tuning in from all over, and we love seeing your names. Now let's get back to Amanda, because the story of what she had already done and what Derek was about to discover is one of the most quietly devastating reversals you will ever hear. Amanda Kingston and Derek Harmon had married when she was 28 and he was 31. At the time, she was 3 years into a commercial real estate licensing career that she genuinely loved, reading lease agreements the way some people read novels, understanding cap rates before most of her colleagues could spell the term. Derek was building a mid-sized business consulting firm, and she believed in him without hesitation. She deferred contracts she should have signed, passed up partnerships she should have taken, and poured her sharpest professional hours into helping him structure deals, edit proposals, and coach him through presentations he was too nervous to give alone. That kind of sacrifice doesn't come with a receipt. And when their marriage ended 3 years later, what she had given him couldn't be returned. He kept the company. He kept the contacts. He kept the narrative, the one where the marriage had failed because she was too ambitious, too cold, too focused on money. It was a lie constructed carefully enough that even some of their mutual friends half believed it. Amanda left with the equity from their shared apartment, a box of business textbooks, and a reference letter from a former colleague. She moved into a one-bedroom rental 20 minutes from downtown. She needed income immediately, and she needed a schedule flexible enough to let her study in the evenings. A logistics company was hiring courier drivers. She applied. She was hired within the week. What she did not do was disappear. While Derek's name appeared on business magazine covers, Amanda spent her evenings doing something no one noticed. She was building a financial education that, 2 years earlier, she would have said she didn't have time for. Commercial real estate finance, private equity structures, limited liability partnerships. She wasn't nostalgic about her old career. She was building a new one, from the ground up, during the hours most people used for television. She drove packages across the city during the day. She studied at night. And slowly, month by month, she began reconnecting with professionals she had met during her years in real estate. People who had watched her work and remembered what she was capable of. One of those people was a man named Harrison Blake. Harrison was 44, semi-retired from a commercial real estate investment firm he'd co-founded in his early 30s, and the kind of person who asked exactly one question when assessing someone's potential. How do they handle being underestimated? He had heard through a mutual contact that Amanda Kingston was driving deliveries and studying finance after dark. He reached out. They had coffee. 30 minutes into the conversation, he slid a napkin across the table with 3 numbers on it and said, "Tell me what this capital structure means to you." She looked at the numbers for 12 seconds. Then she explained precisely what they meant and identified a structural inefficiency he had included intentionally to test her. Harrison Blake smiled for the first time in the meeting. Over the following 18 months, he introduced her to 3 investors from his network. Together, the 4 of them, with Amanda serving as the operational lead and minority stakeholder, began quietly assembling a position in a commercial real estate holding that none of them discussed publicly. The asset in question was Meridian Tower, a 12-story glass and steel office building in the center of downtown, home to law firms, tech startups, financial advisors, and a consulting company on the 9th floor called Harmon Strategy Group, Derek's company. The acquisition took 14 months of careful negotiation. The previous ownership group was aging. 2 of the partners wanted to retire, and the building, while valuable, had been underleveraged for years. Amanda's financial modeling identified the exact refinancing structure that made the deal work for everyone. Her name was on the operating agreement as managing partner. The announcement was scheduled for the first Thursday of the new quarter. 3 weeks before that announcement, she walked into the lobby with a package for the 14th floor. And Derek laughed. She pressed the elevator button. She went upstairs. She delivered the package. She came back down, got in her van, and drove her remaining route. And that evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal document she had already read 14 times, and she read it again. The announcement meeting was held on a Thursday morning in the main conference suite on the building's ground floor. It was not an unusual gathering. Meridian Tower held tenant meetings quarterly, and most of the attendees were property managers, business owners, and legal representatives from the companies that leased space in the building. 62 people in the room. Coffee at the back. A small podium at the front. Derek arrived 4 minutes late, which he typically did when he wanted people to notice him entering. He found a seat near the middle, glanced at his phone, and waited for whoever was running the meeting to begin. The building's outgoing chairman, a 61-year-old man named Gerald Fitch who had owned the property for over 2 decades, stood at the podium. He was brief. He thanked the tenants for their years in the building, explained that the ownership structure had changed as of the previous Friday, and introduced the new managing partner. Amanda walked out from the side of the room. She was wearing a dark blazer over a white shirt. Her hair was pulled back. She carried a legal folder under one arm. She stepped to the podium, placed the folder on the surface, and looked out at the room. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Derek's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. She did not look at him. She thanked Gerald. She introduced Harrison, who nodded from a seat near the front. She outlined, in clear and measured language, what the new ownership structure meant for tenants: stable lease terms, a new tenant support program, and a building management office that would be open 5 days a week for any operational concerns. Her voice was composed. Her eye contact moved steadily around the room. She answered 3 questions from the floor. Then she closed her folder, said she looked forward to working with all of them, and stepped back from the podium. The room was already buzzing. People were leaning toward each other, whispering. Someone near the back was on a phone. Derek sat completely still, the kind of stillness that happens when a person's body is responding to information that their brain is still refusing to accept. The woman he had laughed at in this lobby 3 weeks ago, the woman in the courier uniform he had introduced to his associates as proof of how far she had fallen, was now one of the people who owned the building where he paid rent. Not symbolically, not distantly. She was the managing partner. She would be signing off on lease renewals. She would be setting policy. Her name was on the operating agreement for Meridian Tower, and his name was on a 9-year commercial lease for office space on the 9th floor. He had laughed at her. In her building. What happened next is the part that people who hear this story always find hardest to believe. Not because it's improbable, but because it requires a quality that most people, in Amanda's position, would have already spent. She did not retaliate. This is not because she hadn't thought about it. In the weeks before the announcement, she had reviewed every tenant file in the building, and when she reached Derek's company, she had sat with those numbers for a long time. Harmon Strategy Group was not thriving. The consulting market had shifted. Two of his largest contracts had ended the previous year. The business was still operating, but the margin was thin and getting thinner. 81 employees. Several of them people she had met during her marriage. People who had no part in how it ended. She could have raised his lease rate. She had the legal right to renegotiate when the current term rolled over in 4 months. The number she could have set was not punitive. It was simply the market rate for premium office space in that building, which had risen considerably since his lease was originally signed. It would have been completely defensible. It also would have ended his company within 18 months. She kept his rate flat. She extended the same stability to every tenant in the building, and she launched what she called the Meridian Tenant Continuity Program, a quarterly consultation service, free to all businesses leasing space in the building, that provided access to financial advisors, legal referrals, and marketing consultants. Her reasoning, which she outlined in a letter to all tenants, was direct. Strong businesses make a strong building, and she intended to invest in both. 3 months later, in early spring, she received a request through the building management office for a private meeting. The name on the request was Derek Harmon. She accepted. He arrived at her office on the 12th floor at 10 in the morning. He looked older than she remembered, which was not surprising. He sat across from her desk with his hands folded and did not speak for a moment, which was completely unlike him. Then he said, "I don't know where to start." She waited. "What I said in the lobby." He stopped. "There's no version of that where I was anything other than cruel. And I knew you could hear me. That was the point." He looked at the desk between them. "I told myself for 3 years that what happened in our marriage was your fault. I needed it to be your fault. And then I stood in that lobby and made sure everyone around me saw me treat you like you were nothing." He paused again. "You didn't deserve that. You never did." Amanda listened. She did not rush to respond. When she finally spoke, she said, "I know." Those 2 words carried everything and required nothing further. She did not tell him that she forgave him, because forgiveness is a private process that doesn't need to be announced. She did not tell him that it hadn't hurt, because it had. She did not offer him a speech. She said, "I know." And that was enough, because what she meant was, "I always knew what the truth was. I never needed you to confirm it. I built my life on the truth whether or not you ever acknowledged it." He left her office 35 minutes later looking like a man who had set down a weight he'd been carrying for 3 years without realizing how much it was costing him. What Amanda had built by the time she turned 38 was not just a real estate position. It was a philosophy. She had come through something that had every reason to make her bitter: the public humiliation, the professional sacrifice, the years of effort that went unacknowledged, and she had decided, somewhere along the way, that bitterness was simply not an efficient use of her remaining years. Not morally, not practically, not in any sense that actually served her. She had watched people spend entire decades trying to prove something to someone who would never acknowledge it. That kind of proof never arrives at a satisfying destination. So she had spent her energy differently. She had studied. She had worked. She had formed real partnerships with people who respected her ability. And when the moment came, when she stood at that podium in front of 62 people and Derek's coffee cup stopped in midair, she felt, in the very center of that moment, not triumphant. She felt accurate. This is what I said would happen. This is where the work was always going. She expanded the tenant support initiative in the building's 2nd year. She brought in a young entrepreneur, 29 years old, running a graphic design collective out of a shared office suite on the 3rd floor, and helped her restructure a contract that was slowly draining the business. The collective survived. It grew. It hired 4 additional staff members inside of a year. Amanda sent a short note to the founder that said, I watched someone believe in my work once. It changed everything for me. I'm glad I could return that. The Meridian Growth Initiative, which she formally launched in the building's third year of her ownership, was a fund seeded with a portion of her personal returns from the property. It provided small, structured grants to early-stage businesses, not charity, but capital with mentorship attached. The first cohort included 7 companies. Within 2 years, 5 of them were profitable. Word spread. Other investors contacted her. She was careful about which conversations she entered. Harrison Blake, who had become something close to a mentor, told her once that the most dangerous thing about success at her age was the temptation to become the thing you originally resisted. She kept that sentence close. On an evening in October, a few weeks after the fund's first anniversary, she was on the rooftop deck of Meridian Tower that the ownership group had renovated as a tenant amenity. The city was doing what cities do at that hour, moving, humming, lit from 100 directions at once. She had a folder with her, as she almost always did, but she wasn't reading it. She was just standing there. She thought about the lobby, the uniform, Derek's voice carrying across the marble. She thought about the kitchen table, the legal document, the tea that had gone cold while she read. She thought about what it would have looked like if she had taken the bitter route, if she had raised his rent, if she had stood at that podium and let her eyes find his in the crowd with the deliberate weight of someone settling a score. She could have. No one would have blamed her. But she had watched what that kind of victory produces, and she didn't want it. It feeds for a moment and leaves you hungry in a way that ordinary food can't fix. What she had instead was the thing she had actually wanted all along, which was a life built by her own hands, on her own terms, from the rubble of something that had tried to convince her she was nothing. She had the work. She had the fund. She had the building. She had a team she trusted and a partnership with Harrison that had turned into one of the most professionally honest relationships of her adult life. She had, most importantly, her own certainty about who she was. That certainty had survived the worst thing that had happened to her, and it had only gotten stronger. There is a detail about the lobby encounter that never made it into the gossip that eventually circulated among people who knew both Amanda and Derek. What no one saw, because they were all watching Derek perform, was that in the moment just before the elevator doors opened, Amanda glanced at the return address on the package she was carrying. She already knew it. She had been delivering to that building for 4 months by then. But she looked at it again, just for a second, and there was a small expression on her face that no one in the lobby caught. Not amusement, not anger, something quieter than either. She already knew what she owned. She had known for 6 weeks. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. And somewhere above that lobby, in a management office that didn't yet have her name on the door, the paperwork was already signed. If this story moved you, left you thinking, or gave you something you needed to hear today, hit that like button before you scroll away. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything to our channel trying to reach people who appreciate stories told with honesty. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment with the moment in this story that hit hardest for you. Was it the lobby? The announcement? The meeting where she said, "I know"? Tell us below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.